Okay, so hello everyone. I am very glad that you found some time on Friday night to join our last webinar in the series of standard-based language learning and teaching organized by the American Council of Teachers of Russian. So I wanted to remind you that this webinar is going to be followed by our informal teachers lounge next Friday at 5 p.m. So if you still have any questions or you would like to share your own examples of community-based teaching from your own experience, so please join us next Friday and we will continue our conversation. It is my honor to introduce our speakers today, who are going to share with you their ideas and their learning activities or that they use in their Russian language classroom. And the first speaker is Dr. Svitlana Malykhina, who works as a lecturer in Russian and as a coordinator of Russian language program at the World Languages and Literature Department at Boston University. And her research and teaching areas include Russian and Ukrainian languages, cross-cultural communication, media discourse analysis, and heritage languages. So among her publications are Renaissance of Classical Allusions in Contemporary Russian Media, SCAS, Masters of Russian Storytelling, the Dual Language Ontology, Change and Continuity in the Urban Semiosphere of Post-Soviet Kharkiv. And the second presenter is Elizabeth Lee Roby, who is an upper school Russian teacher and language department chair at Friends School of Baltimore. She designs and implements the curriculum and co-curricular programming for all levels of Russian at her school, from grade 9 to grade 12. And she is the author of Designing and Integrating a Community-Based Learning Dimension into a Traditional Proficiency-Based High School Curriculum, published in 2019. So I think that at this point, I just wanted to ask you to mute all your mics. You can continue posting questions in the chat. And after both Svitlana and Lee presents their materials, we'll have some time for questions and discussion. So thank you, Svitlana.
Thank you very much, Olga, and thank you, ACTR, for developing this series and inviting us to share our practices and be in touch with each other so quickly and in such an uncertain and difficult time. My presentation today is the case of advanced Russian course, Russian in Boston, the course with a community-based component. In my talk, I first present a little bit about my approaches and define concepts that help me develop and implement practices more effectively. I will be talking about community-based learning, which is a crucial approach to service learning that places students within communities and organizations. I aim to show how community-based learning can be further elevated via experiential education outside of classroom. And let me remind you that community-based learning literature has identified many impacts of collaborative projects on developing stronger interpersonal and critical thinking skills. And here is a bridge to next concept. And I will be talking about the project. And I use project both as a generic word and as a learning approach. Project-based language learning, it's a transformative learning experience. And the experience is designed to engage language learners with real-life tasks. The student projects that come out of this community engagement have a purpose other than being a course requirement, but rather be useful product for the Russian-speaking community. An important consideration of community-based course is creating community of practice. And I would like to say a couple of thoughts about this. So community of practice, it's where an individual interacts and connects with the community. Students first serve as marginal members of the community, have difficulties, then take initiatives, and eventually contribute to the community. And I'll look at this in more detail and sure give you more examples from my course. There are a few additional benefits of community of practice for both heritage learners and language 2 learners. One of the benefits is to foster a greater sensitivity to linguistic and perceptual and interpersonal feedback cues. And another benefit is to develop a wider perspective on language and develop a greater awareness of language variation and the possibilities of experiencing the same idea by different linguistic means. With regard to the pedagogical approach, and here is a little bit of a historical perspective. I begin by outlining how the pedagogy of experiential learning works, and working with the diaspora gives rise to the lifelong perspectives that expand the limits of class or school setting education. And here is I bring the approach by John Dewey in 1938. He was one of the pioneering scholars who bring community-based learning that was reflected in his scholarship. And he was talking about service learning, situational learning, learning from experience through reflective thinking, and involvement of community-focused service learning. And there are a few key words for me, so that's why I'm actually bringing his scholarships. I will be talking about experiential education, and this concept evokes an impression of the whole subject to be explored and engage the students in several simultaneous ways. By this, I mean that active learning inside the classroom is further augmented by on-site or virtually on-site visits to space relevant to communication with immigrant community. In my case, because just the content of my course, it's immigrant community. Most evidence from community-based experiential learning link reflective assignments to the development of productive skill. And here is my next concept, which is really important for me. To structure student projects, I use reflection. And reflection as a genre, reflection as a practice, reflection as a task. And I provide scaffolding or prompts. And I'm doing this based on the David Kolb's classification and his model that suggests organizing learners' tasks from the planning to experience and through reflective observations of what was successful and what aspects still need improvement. Reflection prompts include guiding questions and at the same time tasks to move students from one experience to another, from one stage of the course to the next. In other words, students can get directions from those reflection prompts. Reflections also constitute a powerful and complex, meaningful text with the potential to increase student literacy levels if the reflections are written in Russian. And in many cases with my students, many of them are given a choice, but they try to write reflections in Russian. Now let's talk about the course a little bit. So this is a 4-year Russian, 4-credit upper level course to satisfy Russian major or minor, but this is an elective course. Usually I have 5 to 7 students. We offer this course once in 2 years. And this is an elective, as I said, so it's not a requirement. I can get more students. So the idea was like in an ideal world, so that would be great to have 20 students, but we have what we have. So I already got 3 iterations of the course. For the first time, I taught it in 2017 in spring. Prerequisites. So we usually invite students to enroll into this course having at least intermediate mid or intermediate high level according to the ACT-full proficiency scale. We offer this class as a mixed class, so just for the mixed group of traditional students and heritage language learners. We have most of the time students in the junior and senior year, and with the following specializations: Russian major or minor, comparative literature, international relationship, linguistics, computer science, communication, business administration, and pre-med. So as we see, we have quite a motley of students in this course. And at the very beginning, I ask students to work on their set of individual goals. And that's what I've got from the students. They usually come to the class to improve speaking ability, to able to read Russian news sites without a dictionary, to understand most native speakers in day-to-day conversations, to write Russian with fewer mistakes. One of the most advanced and probably most focused and determined students, she put it like for her goal, it's to acquire skills to work with refugees and immigrants. And on the second month of the course, like after 3-4 weeks, I again invite students to continue or just to follow up on their goals. And I don't press them, but I actually just most of them take this course due their future career. So just they're motivated by their own interest. Like we don't have any leverage to push them, to force them to take this course. So what I offer students to make as a follow-up goals: what steps will you take each day to reach your goal? Did you reach at least one of your goals? What activities do you need to do on a regular basis? And what you actually accomplish, and what are the what is still like work in progress? How will you know when you've reached your goals? What will you be able to do? So these kind of questions and this kind of, that's what we done in collaboration. I mean, students and me. And by the third week, most of the students already met the community members, and many of our community members, they're really savvy in the way how they want to us or just to the university teach Russian. So that's why they're my supporters. So they're also having these discussions and conversations with our students about their goals, about what to achieve in this course. So let's talk a little bit about the topic. So this is a huge topic, immigration. And this topic is actually struck me first with an idea that the local Russophone community, contemporary, is not the classic immigrants. And they're rather different from the earlier immigrations, whose participants had no real options to return to Russia or to the Soviet Union. And in the first or second waves, they were even like often were stateless. Our diaspora now, probably starting since the 1990s, they live and work primarily in the US, but they still have connections and the option to travel to the old country and maintain their Russian citizenship, many of them. That local Russophone population lives in a global world, and by this I mean that they're actually more involved in the what happens not only in their old countries but in many other countries. So many of them arrive to the US from Israel or from Germany, And the local Russophone population just, you know, if you try to describe them, they're well-educated, they're professionally successful, with various demographic and cultural background. But one of the common characteristics shared by many, and again, not by all, but they still maintain close cultural connections with homelands, where Russian language is official language or where Russian language is a lingua franca. And I'm talking about Ukraine, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Baltic states. And the tension between the concepts of local and global for these, I call them it's not my own, so just I borrowed this description, transnational Americans, received comparatively limited attention in the university classes. So that's why I decided to pick up on this. And at the same time, I believe that the knowledge of the local diaspora may inform us about our heritage language students in our classes. The ways parents communicate with their children have a direct impact on how heritage learners perceive their heritage language and how they, heritage learners, associate themselves with their heritage culture. So my curriculum strives to expand scholarly inquiry into a few areas. The distribution of media, Russian culture, films, media locally, examine how immigrants redefine their ideas about national, linguistic, cultural identity, hybrid identity, transnational identity, and address the ways diaspora articulates their new savvy global perspectives for the global audience. And here I mean that, as I mentioned, many of them still travel to their old country, have connections with their fellow immigrants all around the world. And so that's why it's so important, I guess. And it's very interesting. It's really like fascinating topics just to listen to people and just get an idea how and what they discuss with other immigrants. Workload. So just I'm leaving it here for like a 1 minute. So just giving you a chance to look at this. So if you have more questions, I would be more than happy to explain. But as I said, so just I have, like in this class, I offer community-based learning as a component, but actually we meet twice a week as a seminar. And we spend time, again, I will explain you what we're doing in class. And this kind of contract that our students assume to kind of to agree with, to commit to, if they enroll in this class. So, and just like for a break, so just I'm giving you a chance to look at the promo video. The students made this video. So here, by the way, the website for this course, and we will be talking, I will give you a tour over this website later. But right now, just let me show you the video. 1 minute video.
Hello, my name is Alex McFarland, and I'm a Russian major here at Boston University. I would like to tell you about a new Russian class that is being offered by the Russian program. After gaining a foothold in the first 2 years of learning the Russian language in class, many students often struggle to improve their conversational abilities. The only way to truly master the language is to talk to native Russian speakers. Well, here in Boston, we have a robust Russian community, and with this class, you can access this wonderful group of people. In Russian Boston, you will have the opportunity to speak to members of the Russian community, volunteer, see performances of Russian music, and so much more. The following are a few examples of some of the unique people we met and amazing experiences we had throughout the semester.
С утра побрился, и галстук новый, горошек синий я надел. Купил 3 астра, 4 ровно прилетел. Я ходил, я вас ждал, и я ждала. Я был зол, и я сердилась, я ушел, и я ушла. Мы были оба, я в аптеке, А я в кино искал вас. Значит, завтра на том же месте в тот же час.
Какой курс русского языка ты рекомендуешь?
Если ты хочешь усовершенствовать свой русский язык вне класса, я рекомендую Russian Boston.
So that's what we have. And now let me go back to the presentation. I'm sorry, I have to just stop sharing for a minute, just for a minute, and just to go back to my presentation. Okay, so next, what we can discuss next. So just next, I'd like to tell you a little bit about outcomes. And I was developing like learning outcomes for learning language and for cultural learning outcomes. So the benefits of bringing component of community-based learning into language classroom. I found the following. Students can build the high impact practices that we see with all the community engaged activities. They build the professional skills and awareness of social and political issues. There is increased motivation for learning language. They're building up confidence in the language. There is a greater empathy. There is an awareness of diversity. Within certain groups like heritage language learners, I also notice the greater self-esteem and perhaps even building their cultural identity for this particular group. For first generation students, we also see the greater retention and greater perseverance in taking language classes. On the language proficiency level, we do see gains in vocabulary development, growing confidence with using the language with native speakers, and improved listening comprehension for standard students and better presentational skills for the heritage language students. Among cultural outcomes, there are broader view of the world and appreciation of language instruction. They thinking on the feet, and they actually just really appreciate this. So just they just start appreciate how the communication is actually more thinking process as a like a way to approach people. And they got insights into their own skills, interests, passions, because just they have to like make a lot of self-presentations, and they have they have the chance to think about what do they actually like, what are their values, so just what they want to tell the strangers. And they actually got some community skills like how to approach diversity and how to develop the feeling of solidarity that they form through collaboration. This sense of accomplishment in turn motivates the students to improve their language proficiency, which will lead to lifelong learning. Students say that they really get to know community and feel excited to use their language in an actual context. As I said, community-based component, it's only one component of the course. And here you can see some tasks that and some places where our students can perform their skills. And I want to actually to talk a little bit more about the typical course, and then I will talk about what kind of challenges we got during the COVID. In the typical semester, I would place students in contact with families, and that was done like pretty easy. So first students gave a call, introduced themselves. So I met, of course, just prior to the semester, probably 3 or 4 months before the semester starts. I met with all of those diaspora partners, as we call them, and they eagerly speak to students. So it doesn't, like at the first level, it doesn't take a lot of time from our diaspora members. So the wide range of impacts of community-based practices when language students is involved with community engagements, there are kind of described by our community members. The community members are looking for our students to come. So just what our students can offer them. So they can develop teaching materials if they go to the local schools. They can translate documents. They can translate poetry, which some of the community members write and want to get published on the website or in the literary journals, in the English literary journals. Our students can develop websites, and that's what one of our students did for the documentary film director. Our students can provide English subtitles, again, for our theater director and for documentary film director. Our students can tutor with the organizations like subsidized community apartment and just living for seniors, and they can offer lessons in technology. Let's us talk a little bit about the pandemic. So during the pandemic, for the first couple of weeks, like we got fewer community members, and everyone comes together at one of the meetings. And after the a common conversation, students actually went to the breakout rooms, and that we repeated for a couple of classes. After that, so when students were already comfortable in staying one-on-one with the community members, so just they met without my control, without me hovering over their shoulders. We've been able to maintain work, and keeping in mind the level of challenges that technology brings to community partners, especially to the older community partners, I think that we did a really great job. For pandemic period, students interact with community in slightly different ways, and students really see all of those challenges that people experience. It was obvious that the inequity is a huge problem. And as a result of COVID, it was a very big push to provide language equity and additional support service in multilingual speakers in our community. And specifically because of people are very conscious and anxious of the inequity of the systems, they approach our students even on their own initiative. And we don't undertake the community-based practices lightly. So I realize that it's not so easy to organize this component. And one of the goals was deconstruct the language barriers for both groups, for the community-based partners, many of whom were almost monolingual, and for our students who were very apprehensive of the manner of the community-based partners and of the kind of wilderness of the native speakers language. And I'd like to underline the importance for our students to listen to the community needs. I want to emphasize the patience when students realize that there are problems. Most of the time, students can see solutions easily, but sometimes students can't see the complexity of the partnership. And that partnership was cemented for a long time. So I've got a couple of instances when students without intentions actually broke down the relationships with couple of our community partners. So just I in other words, so just I lost a couple of very dear people to me. But again, so just I can't blame students or I can't blame those partners. So just that happens. So just we're talking about like people relationships. So just our students, when they meet those community partners, they already aware that they're making friends. They're not only trying to I don't know, to provide some service or only fulfill their requirements for the course. So there is some kind of interesting situations that I observed. Some students, they were sure, I don't know why, so they were sure that they can change the life of those community partners. So they actually just kind of were like, they got in the moment, oh, I thought I'm gonna change this person's life like very, very quickly. And in how way? I am going to employ this person. I'm going to write a CV for this person. I'm going just to send out his CVs to the 100, firm, and this person like would be successful. There are a lot of internal expectations that students had just because they are learning and they really want to see immediate results, and that was a natural thing. And we have a lot of reflections in class to kind of head off these tendencies, because this is a dangerous tendency. So the students already got some kind of a power in those relationships. So just in a way, they can offer some service. So they sometimes forget about the responsibilities and being close by, but don't kind of like threshold these private boundaries. But I can also, I can also share with you other students' problems. So one of the students wrote in her reflections after like a couple of meetings with one of the diaspora members. I quickly realized that I was not going to receive the information needed for my project to thoroughly analyze the issue. Because just like he, the community member, described their experiences in a way that made it seem as if they were protecting me from the whole truth. And he was talking about, with this community member, she was talking about anti-Semitism. So that was an interesting experience for her and for me as well. Then let us talk a little bit about just what we actually, like how I organize this course. So I presented it in 4 stages, and for each stages I got this kind of, well, like title, subtitle. So reading short stories by famous Russian immigrants. Then research and study the history of Russian immigration. Again, we use different genres, and prepare for engagement with community partners. So by having conversation in class, discussions, by making the interview questions, by trying to figure it out what the difference between interview questions and research questions. And okay, I see I have only 5 minutes. Like when we're talking about these questions, so just let me again just leave it for a couple for 1 minute, or just maybe we can discuss it later. So just look at this. So first we start making the topics for the project, and that's really important for the students realize that research question, it's not the same, it's not the questions that you can pose to community partners, because that's really research. So just you have to get prepared, you're supposed to like some work should be done. And that was a serious discussion. And I can tell you, so it wasn't like so obvious issue for many students. Then we start talking about interview practices. And we start with 3 to 5 topics. And we make collectively in class, we make the list of questions. This course, it's not the course about kind of getting the life story. That's why on our list, we didn't get questions like where you were born and like how old you were when you arrived to the US. It was naturally like if these questions like raised in the conversation, then the community members answer. But it wasn't our goal to ask this. So we were discussing some what means priming and what means like, you know, rephrase your question. And definitely you can imagine there were so many instances when students just came to me and said, you know, I don't understand the word, what I'm supposed to do. And then like we got just some topics to like go around with these problems, or just we practice some strategies. I gave them some advices what to listen to. So just we listened to the Columbia University archive of the old emigres. That was very helpful website for us. And we were talking about all of those actual proficiency skills, like how to describe and just how to elicit the description from the community members, how to narrate. Students appreciated all kind of advices on the storytelling. So look at this kind of topics or themes of the interview questions: personal experiences, education, employment, cultural practices, family, urban centers, habits, food, politics. So questions like what makes, like really important issue was what makes a question important and what makes a question unanswerable or answerable. So I gave a lot of interview tips and tricks. We invited the local speakers who were practitioners in communication, who were journalists. And again, so there are a few other examples of the assignments. And here I'm showing you the photo of one of our speakers. So just we got all of those 3 iterations of the course, we've got absolutely fantastic lecture speaker series. So we invite speakers, we paid them, and we figured out very quickly that it's really important for our students. So just they came to our classes. And again, after those speakers gave their lectures, our students got an assignment. So one of them, it was an assignment on the short story, very like unconventional story by Nabokov, Guide to Berlin. And students presented in class about Russian emigre. Students were given a chance to introduce the film director, and then to conduct the Q&A session with translation for like a big community event. So they translate poems, as I say, and they perform in a show in the drama theater. And this probably would be a very interesting topic for you. So our students got drama lessons from the film, from the theater director. And here you can see our students in the Russian local theater, so just on the location. And students, what they reported, so just let me like read it out. The students reported that they developed new mental and physical habits in the drama classes through role play. They will learn verbatim transcript skills, so just how to get what the community members told them, how to put it not in their own words, but just how to keep this in the authentic form, and just how to actually put the boundary between what diaspora members were actually talking, and just what is the opinion of our students. Okay, I can see, Olga, just to, like a few more slides. So let me show you the, we kept a Google Doc for analyzing literature and poetry in this class, because just that's part of the class. And here you can see how the students leave in the comments and how I answer to their comments. So they're providing some kind of handouts. So that's one of my another projects for Russian poetry. And you can see here the Marina Tsvetaeva's poem "Читателям газет", "Читатели газет", and you can see some graphics, some comics next to each stanzas. Students actually just appreciated this form, and you can read here and just you can look at the comments. So just they're trying to figure out the like puns and the word play, and that's what we got. This kind of discussion we've got on the Google Doc, not even in class, but on the Google Doc. So what means reflection prompts? So reflection prompts, that's actually a set of the questions. And again, I'm showing you the types of the questions we got. So did you encounter any challenges? How did you handle challenges? Describe the skills that you gain. And you can see. So I guess that this will be recorded and you can like go back again to the slides and just look at this. And the final project, it was a multimedia. And this is a project that was placed on the site. And again, I can give you just the last minute. So I can show you that after the slide 30, I have the works cited, and there are a few slides of the works. Probably you may want to use them. They can be useful. Right now, just let me again go back to our website and just to show you the home page. So please look at this at your free moment. So just you can see the gallery where all the students' projects are placed. You can see interviews and lectures where all of our guest speakers recordings are placed. You can see the memory and food part of this website. So just that's basically all I wanted to share with you about this community-based course. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. This was a very, very detailed, well-developed course, and the materials are extremely helpful. I hope that everyone will have a chance to look again, and maybe you can share the slides with us later. So Lee, if you're ready, you can start sharing your screen.
Yes.
And we will have questions at the end for both presenters.
Okay, oops, that's not the first page. Hold on. Let me unshare that. Hold on. Unshare my screen. Get to the right place. Hold on. Okay, I guess I'm not seeing this, so I guess I'm going to have to go back this way. Okay. Okay. I was originally going to show when I agreed to do this, I was originally going to present something entirely different. And I do have, as Olga pointed out, a published article on community-based learning in Baltimore that has a framework for novice, intermediate, low, intermediate, mid, intermediate, high students. And so that, that's already out there in the world and that's already published, and it's probably easier to look at it that way. Right now, honestly, with everything going on in Ukraine, it was really hard for me to think of presenting on something other than that. So I'm going to show you how I engage the Community World Readiness Standard with elements from both project-based language learning and from community-based language learning as kind of a bridge from where we were with the last session about project-based learning. Here I've just put up on the screen for you quickly the standards, so you can see them. And as you can see here, while we're dealing mainly with the community standards today, it's a ribbon that continues. And so usually these standards are not taught in isolation or learned in isolation, but they integrate. And so you will see these standards at the bottom of my slides when they are addressed on that particular slide. So February the 21st or the 24th, I realized, for myself and for my students, that there was nothing appropriate to do except to be addressing the war in Ukraine in real time. And so where I normally, backward plan something, this was going to demand a more flexible approach. And so I tried to think in terms of what in this horrible situation, how should I approach this? There's so many different ways. And so what I did was just kind of brainstorm and set my objectives and my guiding essential questions. And that would define the approach to the topic, which is what would ground our work, but the daily news and developments of the events would define the specific context. And so these are the objectives that I set. And I was trying to think in terms of, I wanted to educate the Russian students, and I teach high school students at Friends School, as well as our larger school community about the war, starting with the root causes of the conflict, historical and conflict specific background. I was thinking in terms of the fact that, potentially I'm developing future diplomats. And so I wanted the students to understand the war from various perspectives, to understand national interests and international politics, without, endorsing any particular, approach. Certainly, I wanted them to understand the war from Putin's perspective without, of course, validating anything that Putin is doing. And so I just want to make that clear. I know we're in a really emotional time. And I just saw that. And so that is something I make very clear to the students. And I watch us all struggle with that. I wanted to develop their media literacy skills so that they thought about what information is provided and to whom, and how that impacts developing public opinion. I wanted them to understand the experience of individual citizens as separate from but impacted by government. I wanted to develop their intercultural competency skills, their ability to understand cultural values and perspectives, where they come from, how they're formed, and to read the subtext, because not everything's always said. I wanted them to develop empathy for those experiencing war. I think for Americans, sometimes that's difficult because we've never experienced war in our own country. I wanted them to develop civic responsibility and pursue right action, and to think about how we can stand in solidarity with Ukraine, and to bring the full Russian program, which are all of my students, novice through intermediate, high, and our school community together around some common right actions. And for my intermediate level students, I wanted them to develop the ability to describe the war and how they and others feel about it. And so, as you can see, these objectives aren't yet linguistic, right? These were just all the things that I was thinking that were going to ground our work. So is this community-based language learning? No, it isn't. Community-based language learning as an actual methodology is about using your learning language through interaction in the language out of a community. And so this is not language learning within the L2 community, but it's using their language to serve a community. And it's driven by a sense of civic responsibility and action, which are big components of CBLL. And so I'm not going to be driven by the methodological frame of community-based language learning here, but by my objectives. And you can see in blue, I've highlighted the ones that align with the objectives of community-based language learning: the educating the larger community, the civic responsibility, the right action, the standing in solidarity. And so my objectives directed my selection of content and my learning context, because there would be learning in class and there would be learning in the community. And the proficiency level of the students directed me in terms of my task development, what we call as the can-do statements. And basically, rather than can-do statements, I aligned myself with driving essential learning questions. to direct the work with students, I created a sort of need to know, a question that they would be interested in and that they needed to be able to articulate the answer to for sustained inquiry. And that is really a component of project-based learning. And the questions, as you can see below, are что происходит в Украине, почему, что люди в США и в России знают о войне, какую роль играют СМИ, какую роль играет идеология, and separating those two, где граница между идеологией и пропагандой, как разные люди, and I put in the разные for an emphasis, относятся к войне, почему, и чем мы можем помочь. And so, of course, my novice students don't really understand these questions, but I still give them to them in Russian. I still relate back to them, and I will also tell them in English. So, of course, in order to be able to do these things, these things, if you looked at them, they look like advanced and superior tasks, right? But we're going to do things with language later, but I needed to set the foundation for what's going on in Ukraine and why in English. And so actually, I was not even in school on February the 25th. One of my alums, who's also a Haverford Russian grad, was substitute teaching for me. And he actually texted me almost in the middle of the night saying, Russia's invaded. And, he was supposed to sub for me the next day. And he's like, I've been looking at this all night. I'm looking around for materials. And I said, absolutely. And I just said, give them something contextualizing the conflict so that they understand Ukraine as a country. Give them something, if you can see something from the Russian perspective and something from the Ukrainian perspective, so that they can kind of understand the tension there. And what is here is what he came up with. That's a beautiful 32-minute video. And then Putin's speech and Zelensky's speech, which they read in this English translation, and then 2 days later could not access. So, it was kind of that moment, and actually it's accessible again. I just want to give a shout out to ACTR with the special teachers lounges, because as you will see as I go through this, the materials that I am pointing to are largely being pulled from that compilation of materials that others gathered. And I have simply created learning materials to accompany them. And so my first kind of shout out is to Michael White, who did a beautiful presentation introducing Ukrainian Russian joint history and then Putin's interpretation of Ukrainian history. And so it's really good at understanding that kind of twist that Putin has. And what I basically did is I pulled that up. It's also a beautiful presentation. And I had the students narrate it because they had the class the day before with my alum, and I wanted to see what they could remember. And so, of course, this is all happening in English at this point. And I'm doing this in all of my classes. Later, as we move on to talk about what is unfolding in Ukraine, we will be using video clips from the news and sometimes headlines, usually from Medusa. And I will often have them give them, say, for example, what, using your level, give them 5 minutes. What can you say about this in Russian? So often the news will be in English so that they actually understand it and they're staying abreast of the news, a 5-minute maybe news clip. And then sometimes I will say, I can give you one word. And I'm okay with like the freshmen, if they write one sentence, they often don't have verbs. And so that's been helpful for them to see how they can use their language skills. And also helpful because if I give them the headline right after they watch the clip, then they can often make out the headline more easily. And so that's what we were doing in class. And again, at this point, it's largely in English. That about took us through a week. And then we talked about how will we raise the upper school community awareness. So how will we move from beyond our classroom into the larger community? And we decided we would use student leaders. And so we have an active Russian club. And so what was really great is that the history teachers kind of put them front and center because I sent to the history teachers the materials that I had and what I was doing and some extra materials. And what they said is how prepared are the Russian students to be able to do this, to be able to lead these discussions. And so that's what really happened. And so that also really invested the Russian students in making sure they understood because they became really the leaders in their history classes. Then one of my Russian heads, a junior, Lex Taz, he leads our current event discussions for our Russian club anyway, and he did a series on war in Ukraine. every Wednesday is club days for us. And so he would select a video and lead the discussion. And this Alex Brooks is my alum, created a great resource list. And I will share this with you at the end. You can go here with sources of media sources, because he wanted a representation in not just US, but across the country. And so as you see below, these are the topics that Lex came up with. He had started, as you see, before the war. And then he came up with things that were of interest to the students at the time, sometimes matching things that we were talking about in class, that, you know, we weren't going to spend the whole class speaking in English about a topic. So students were motivated to go to this current events discussion. Again, you can say this is a way to move to the broader community. So that the second thing, what do people know about the war? And what is the role of the media, the SME, in deciding that? And so as you can see here, I've chosen a very simple question. Что мы видим и слышим в новостях? Что русский видит и слышит? And so showing a media clip, and again, it could be in English, it could be without sound. We could start with a video. And sometimes giving them, you know, asking them what words do you need, what nouns do you need, or giving them the nouns that they need, or having them on the board, get them to see and get them to think in terms of how does that impact? Like, this is that media literacy thing. How does this, even, like, if we look down at social media, some of the younger people in Russia are getting a lot of news from social media through a VPN, even though that's been shut down. They have ways around it. Or YouTube is still up, and if they know English. And so there's a generational divide now as well in terms of what news people are getting and how that's impacting worldview. We talked about all these events that you can see as happening in Russia so that students would know. We watched this clip right here, which is from Rain News about the independent media being shut down. Again, that is it's either in English or it has English subtitles. We talked about the language that's being used, using the word spецоперация instead of война, освобождение instead of вторжение, and talked about that a little bit. And so, you know, you can see the standards I'm addressing. And here we're trying to develop those media literacy skills and try to develop this sense too of even what we see. Our news coverage, for example, is giving us heightened emotion and anger for crimes against humanity, upset. And what would it be like if we didn't have that? Where would we be emotionally? What will we be thinking about? And I'm preparing students as we do this, one, to develop these skills, but also to move on later to when we start to watch interviews, because there's a lot that happen in interviews that's not the spoken word. And this kind of setup is really important for students to be able to read that. So then we moved on to ideology. What do people in the US and Russia know about the war? What role does ideology play? And that's our general ideology. And so this was another class where actually the whole class was in English for all levels, because I felt that we needed this background in order to move forward. And they watched Biden deliver his remarks on the Ukraine crisis from Warsaw, where he's really speaking as the leader of the democratic world. I think he calls himself that, in a battle for democracy, and it's a battle of ideologies with Russia. We are on the right side of history. And he goes through and he goes back to the Soviet period. And it really sounds very much like a Cold War speech, with a dose of pride for the Ukrainian courage, a lot of pride for the Ukrainian courage, and for Polish support being on the right side of history. And then we watched Vladimir Posner, who expressed his criticism of US-led NATO expansion and how he believes that that's led to the current crisis. So again, it did this not to endorse either one of these views, but to just say these are two views that are out there. And if you're only hearing one, or if you're primarily hearing one, or if you're not even thinking about the other, or if you're only hearing that, how does that impact? And then I asked them to write in English, and you can see that same prompt, which is what I basically just told them. And this was going to be the Russian Club current events discussion at the next one. I said, if you need to unpack this a little bit, you can come. That the little essay was due after that. And so again, that's the media literacy, and then just thinking about how culture and how ideology influences the way we think. And so then the next thing is with ideology is we're talking about teaching ideology. And someone, and I wish I knew who this person was, because this is an amazing source. Someone put this up on the ACTR resource page, and it is from the online news source Bumaga. They publish teaching materials, which are a slide presentation for use in the teaching of what they call as a специальная миротворческая операция. You all know that, for grades 6 to 8 and 9 to 11. And so it is actually the materials that were sent to schools to be used. And so the content of this is, the first part talks about, with a quote from Gogol, talks about Russia and Ukraine are две части единого исторического, духовного и культурного пространства. So again, this whole idea that these countries are inextricably bound by their history. And then he gives the events, baptism, and I say he, it's not Putin, but this is put out by the Kremlin, the baptism of Kiev, the Pereyaslawskaya Agreement, the Great Patriotic War, and Gogol. Then the second part is the anti-Rossiyskiy Put, and the Ukrainian, is listed there, the Ukrainian repression of Russian speakers and the NATO expansion and aggression. So we read these materials in order to understand what is the discourse coming out of Russia, what are Russians hearing, what is kind of the ideological position. And the task that I asked them to do, and at this point, I couldn't use freshmen because this is all in Russian. And so I used my sophomores through my seniors there. And again, my sophomores are only novice high, through intermediate mid, a few are intermediate high. And in pairs and small groups, they took slides. And on these slides, they first translated the slide, and I let them use Google Translate. I said, your goal is to actually use Google Translate, but then make sure you know how the Russian matches up to the English. And we are going to later do some work kind of working through that language, particularly with regard to reading knowledge of forms. But I wanted them to get to the, get to the content. And then they researched the events. And when they researched the events, they had to research them and analyze them. And they had to use how Putin uses the event to legitimize action in Ukraine as one slide. And then the counter argument. And they really struggled with this because, of course, they believe the counter argument. And so they wanted to say, well, there's this but. And I said, no, you have to pretend you're making the very best slide possible. Like, what is Putin's strongest argument? What is the strongest counter argument? And so just on an intellectual level, that was a really good exercise for them. And then they presented it to the class. They got feedback. And before I say that, one of the things that was an interesting twist here is I was talking about this in the faculty lounge, and one of the history teachers said, oh my God, this is amazing. I really wish you're translating these slides. I want to use this for my international studies class. And I said, oh, yay, great, perfect, authentic audience, right? And so then I created, so then we have a project-based language learning opportunity. And so what I said to them is we created a contest where, because each 3 grades are doing this. And so there are the level 3 slides, the sophomore slides, the junior slides, and the senior slides. And I said, you guys are going to compete. He's going to look at all of them and choose the best one. And we will make a compiled of the winning slides. And so that link there is the compilation of their winning slides. But I allowed them to present because ultimately this was very hard. Get my feedback, then adapt their slides and their thinking, and then they recorded the final version. And so when he looked at it, he looked at recorded versions. And so when you go to the compilation, you can press on the recording and hear them present their slides. And so again, this is a lot of work in English. The presentation was in English. The information was extremely important. The translation in Russian was largely done by Google Translate, but then we did language work. We focused on form for reading knowledge, like participles, present active, and especially past passive, and switching past passive into the kind of razgovorna conversational form of the third person plural verb. And so that was actually, I think, really helpful for them. And then they did take a translation quiz, which was just, I'm going to highlight words and you have to tell me what they are. And you have to tell me the grammar. And so they kind of had to do a backward learning because they were slides and not an article. The language was much more limited. And it was great because it was the words that tend to repeat themselves. So especially for the intermediate students, in terms of preparing them with the skills to be able to read an article, it was a great use of that. And then we talked, with the exception of the seniors, in English about how they think as an education, this would affect worldview. And so here I was trying to both talk about media literacy, but also develop intercultural competency skills, the ability to understand cultural values and perspectives, where they come from and how they're formed. So finally, now we're getting to work where we're going to be more speaking Russian. That was reading. Like I said, they did develop a lot of vocabulary. And actually, before we did that, another thing that they did is they did a formative writing where they just said, "Что вам было интересно узнать? Мне интересно было узнать да-да-да-да." And a lot of that was taken off the slides, but they had to go through and think of like, what was really interesting. So all of them can talk about расширение НАТО, like they could use those words because they came off the slides, and they just chose 10 things. So that was a reasonable kind of writing exercise for them to do. So at the end of this, they had the questions. Well, do Russians support the war? Do Russians believe their media? Do they believe these materials? And are the sanctions helping? Those were the main student questions. And so we were going to go about how different Russians learn about the war. And I found this I actually found on my own, YouTube channel 1420, which is largely young people, although they do later ask older people, so they have the contrast. But they're interviews with people off the street. It's a vlogger, basically, a guy who asks, and it's really great for intermediate level students because it's all in Russian, but it's subtitled in English. And so, and it's not particularly difficult. Like I felt like my intermediate students could really understand a good amount of it, and they could understand even more now. And so the first one was, what do young Russians think about Putin? And he sticks in the special operation. What do Russians think now, 3 weeks after the start, which is really about sanctions, the spetsoperatsiya, as he needs to call it, and the future. And then what do Russians think about NATO, which we did after the Posner video. And here I have a link of a handout in case you want to use it. I'm a big advocate for very, very simple template handouts that can just get reused. And so this one basically is that. It gives a chart, it gives the question, and it asks them to list 5 positive answers, 5 negative answers, and 5 neutral answers. And then что вам было интересно was not list 5 things. They really got used to this. And because it had English subtitles, I said, go through first and write it in English, write the time marker, and then you can go back later and use the closed captions if you need it. Try to listen, then use the closed captions, see what you can do. And then they would come to class. I'm like, что вам интересно было узнать? And they talk to their partners and try to get some of that vocabulary, which was largely picked out of the video, so largely correct. And again, all of my students could do this, because even my lowest students, they could just do it for information. These were some really great conversations, because what we learned really quickly is that you learn as much by what they don't say as what they say. And even students recognize that. They're all answering that they are, apolitical, they're neutral, some of them said it's dangerous to answer this question. Some of them contradicted themselves. Like the first one was like Putin krasavchik. And some of them, like they would talk about one thing, they would say something that was acceptable, and then something later that they would say would entirely contradict the first thing. So it was very clear what they were saying. And so that was super fascinating for the students. And they got better at reading that without my kind of help. Then there was Linda Benedette put up a fantastic source along with a fantastic handout from in Medusa. That's an article, «Русские после первого дня войны». And what it is Russians who have relatives in Ukraine and how they're feeling after the first day of war. And it's fantastic for intermediate level students because it's just a paragraph. It's like each person has a paragraph, and Lynn's handout is perfect. She has them moving from, they do it in the I form, and she has them moving into reported speech using она говорит что, она объясняет что, она добавляет что. And so I had them do her handout, which she shared. And then I also had them highlight emotion vocabulary. So they each just did 1 or 2. but then they went through and they highlighted all, they were encouraged to use as much emotion vocabulary as possible and to highlight it, because their next task, which would be a presentational writing, but formative, would be to either write a note, and this again was just my juniors and seniors doing this, my intermediate mid students, to write either a note responding to one of the Russians or a diary entry on how you are feeling about the war. And I always encourage them to lift heavily from what they're reading. And I actually, as I've done here, I make them put the lifted vocabulary in red font and what they create in black font. I have them make a chart, and on one side, they write in one side of the chart, and then I cut and paste it into the other side, and I just make it right. And then I make them go through, this is all in Google Docs, and comment on their mistakes, where they see differences, where they see I've changed case endings, if I have to rewrite something, because it doesn't make sense. And if I have to rewrite something, they have to translate what I wrote and explain it. They have to explain the cases. And then I always end with a presentational speaking. And so here again, I'm trying to get them to read the subtext, the unsaid, develop empathy for those experiencing war, and to have the intermediate students develop the ability to describe the war and how they feel about it. And I'm really grateful for these people who gave me these sources. Lynn, shout out to Lynn. And so they did some writing for all of this, and this was all formative writing. I corrected it all. I try not to punish them for making mistakes, because I don't want them to use Google Translate. And so it's really a lot about content, and then a lot about how well they explain their mistakes. And so this last thing is a larger formative, again, presentational writing, but it's a script for what will be summative. And so here is their written reflection, and they have to address these prompts that I have here. And these are a lot of the things that they've written about already. So I told them, like, if you did a really good job on your formative writing, you're doing a lot of compiling and writing transitions, and maybe addressing this, like there's a question about whether they liked this unit, because they hadn't done that yet. If you didn't do a very thorough job, you're going to do a lot more writing. And I made them put it in blue font, the new stuff, so I would know what to correct again. And so they write this, and then from here, they have to do a final summative speaking. And for me, the last activity is always a presentational speaking, because I don't feel like they have it till they've owned the vocabulary. A writing exercise is just them demonstrating for me that they can put sentences together, but I don't know, like, I usually know if they can do that or not. I need them to actually learn the vocabulary and be able to use it. And so if you look here, just so you realize that we did indeed do some Russian, even though we did a lot of English. This student is a junior who's never had any outside experience.
Очень рад, что у нас была возможность учиться о ситуации в Украине. Я думаю, что очень важно узнать, как русские думают о войне и как дети в России учатся о ситуации, потому что это помогает нашему пониманию о войне. Мне тоже было интересно узнать, как типический русский гражданин думает о войне, потому что в Америке мы не хорошо знаем, что они думают о войне. Мы тоже читали о крещении киевлян и о других важных событиях, которые связывают историю Украины и историю России. И затем мы узнали, как Путин использует эти события, чтобы сделать свою пропаганду. Вначале трудно говорить об этом по-русски, но как мы писали и разговаривали об этом, теперь не так трудно. В интервью, которое мы видели, мне интересно было услышать, что многие русские не понимают политическую ситуацию. Может быть, они не хотели объяснить, как они относятся к ситуации. По-моему, большинство людей против войны, но некоторые люди скрыли свои настоящие чувства. Может быть, они боятся Путина. Мне кажется, что большинство молодых русских против войны, но пожилые россияне думают по-разному. Еще есть русские, которые поддерживают Путина, и военную операцию, которую он делает в Украине. Мне интересно было услышать мнение русских о войне. Я думаю, что война действительно самая большая катастрофа этого века. Это очень печально. У нас всех есть чувство беспомощности, потому что никто не может помочь украинцам. Я надеюсь, что все будет хорошо, но я не знаю, что так будет. Много русских граждан чувствуют вину, потому что их президент начинал войну. Мы все люди, и поэтому мы должны избегать войны, а не начинать их. Я надеюсь, что война быстро закончится. Слава Украине!
So good, right? Despite speaking that much English, this is a student who's a junior and who hasn't had any, I mean, he's one of my best students, but he also hasn't had any outside experience. Both Lex Tawes did the virtual Nestle Y program, and Julia Mammon did a summer program as well. But if you listen to Julia Mammon, who speaks for over 6 minutes, you'll really get the sense of how deeply we got into what Russians think about war. And so it was really quite amazing. And so all of that really is the classroom learning. That's not the community piece, right? There was some project-based learning in there. Here we move from learning to action, and this didn't all happen at the end. But I just wanted to set this up. You know, you have to set up some organization. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to talk about next was one of the very first things we did. And that was we addressed the question, you know, after we learned what happened, we're like, you know, what can we do? And we decided to hold a peace rally. The students learned about the crackdown on protests in Russia, of course. They saw videos of the arrests. They viewed images and slogans. And of course, they learned Нет войне and other slogans. They looked at Tihi Piket, which also I got from the ACTR. I wouldn't have known so many sources without the ACTR resources. And then based on those, they made peace posters for a peace rally that we would have on Club Day. We wanted to expand our influence. And it's also really time where we have to think about making sure that somebody takes Russian next year. And we've lost our after school exploratory program. So we decided to connect with the 5th grade and go over for poster making and bring them to our peace rally. Because of COVID, we weren't allowed to do that. So we still have to figure out what to do with the 5th grade. But what we ended up doing is deciding to do is running a stamp in solidarity with Ukraine peace poster contest with the 4th grade. And if you, I don't have time to show you this, but if you click on the virtual introduction, you'll see, because we couldn't go over, the students who are leading this do a Zoom recording of a slideshow that they've created where they tell the students about war, about protest, about how protest is repressed in Russia, but that we have the freedom of speech to do this. And they encourage them to make posters, and they are going to judge this contest for the 4th grade. And so again, this is about developing the civic responsibility, the right action, bringing our influence beyond just our classroom. We also wanted to celebrate Ukrainian culture. You know, it's so sad. And to stand in peace and solidarity with Ukraine, that we learned 2 Ukrainian songs, and we started every class singing them. The first one was Довго спала Україна, and I'll be honest, I really wanted them to sing that at the peace protest in 2 days. And so what I did was decide they were going to have a contest and that the administrators was going to judge the contest, and we were going to do the contest 2 days from now. So that's actually how the idea of contest started. And so that we learned that song first, and then we learned the national anthem. If you can click on these, you'll find a trilingual lyrics in Ukrainian, Russian, and English for both songs. And we did look at the Ukrainian-Russian language comparison. We looked at how they are indeed different languages, not as Putin says, but we did look at you know, some of the standard differences between the two, and they found that fascinating. We then decided to plan a singing protest in the image of the Estonian singing revolution. So some of them, they knew from an earlier project what that was, and they told the class about that. And so we decided that we were going to sing the Ukrainian national anthem at the next protest. And then we decided that we would expand our influence. And Junior Alice Riley, who's a great singer, volunteered to teach non-Russian students and faculty to sing the Ukrainian national anthem during our morning extra help period in advance of the rally. And so she sent that out by our email and had a good number of people, especially faculty, come. So that was fun. And then students and teachers in other divisions were invited. And then we have 3 schools that are right in our neighborhood. And we invited them to come and they confirmed attendance. So at that point, we're like, oh, there's going to be a lot of people here potentially. And we reached out to the TV stations. And the club has made 200 mini posters with the Ukrainian flag and the lyrics of the national anthem. And we did go out singing. And so that was pretty cool. And, you know, this did a lot to create energy around it. Like the students were super proud that they pulled that off. And they were on the news too. And so we then continued to celebrate Ukrainian culture and fundraise for Ukrainian refugees by having class-sponsored bake sales. So each one of the Russian, the 9th graders, 10th graders, 11th graders, 12th graders, each week, one group would sponsor a bake sale. I encouraged them to make Ukrainian apple cakes. I don't know if this is the most, I don't know if there's a better Ukrainian recipe that's also simple. You got to do simple too. But a lot of them made brownies and cookies, but I didn't care. I said the important thing is to make sure you have stuff and we can sell it so that we can raise money for Ukrainian refugees. We also encouraged families to attend a Baltimore-wide fundraiser at a local restaurant with Ukrainian food, and a good number of people did. And we invited a speaker to our collection, which is like our assembly, who wanted to collect medical supplies, and we did a medical supply donation drive. And so then the students chose which organizations. It was important to us to serve organizations that were immediately serving people on the ground. And so they chose these 2 organizations. Through this, I will say that, you know, it all started with the singing contest. That was my manipulated decision. But then I wanted, you know, everything was so sad and upsetting. And these are teenagers. And I also wanted to get as much community spirit and get them doing this, get as many people as possible. So I created an interclass Russian student competition for fundraising and participation. And so they get a point for every $1 at their bake sale, you know, and they're supposed to encourage donations. They had a poster, they had the poster contest first and got points, the song contest. They got a point for coming to a peace rally and bringing, you know, if they brought other juniors who said they were there to represent the junior class, they got a point. And so this became a way of introducing some levity into such a horrible situation. And they really did a lot to rally the rest of the school, not just themselves. And they did a lot of arguing with me about how I did the point system and whether they thought that was fair. So they all know the word spravedliva, nespravedliva at this point. And the winning slides are here too. They have points for winning slides. And what I'm going to do, we've basically done everything. I'm going to close this out and give them a week for final donations. And just say, you know, however you can rally. And so the contest nature of it, it really ended up creating sort of the poster contest and the song contest were judged by administrators. This was judged by another teacher. So it kind of created a mini kind of PBL characteristics, at least the authentic audience and contest frame, which increased motivation. And so if we look here, we can just quickly glance through the pictures. And I was able, you know, I'm able to pass this on. If people are worried about, for example, what do you do to sell your program? Like it was easy for me to do this because I sent this to marketing. I sent this to the parents and said, look at your children, which of course parents love if you teach at the high school level. They sent it out through our middle school and lower school because there are middle school and lower school people here. And, you know, hopefully that will help my enrollment. These are people who went to the city fundraiser. Oops. These are the songs. And it's the juniors who won. And I don't have time to show you that song, but this is all linked so you could decide to watch it on your own if you were interested. This is our poster contest. And this is the sides that they used to. And here,
Marching for Ukraine, students at the Friends School brought voices of protests, standing along North Charles Street together. They sang.
To show that the Russian program here at Friends School is actually supporting the Ukrainian community, I think is incredibly important.
Alongside the students, their teachers. Alexander Brooks says today's movement is one inspired by history. Baltic states in the 80s and 90s protesting Soviet occupation, creating the singing revolution.
That revolution was done through singing, and we are singing the Ukrainian national anthem in solidarity with Ukraine.
It's a moment where even the most timid of students are now finding their voice.
Even the kids that are not usually the most engaged in class have been incredibly engaged on this because everyone is seeing what's going on in Ukraine.
All watching as the fight continues for freedom in Ukraine and continues here at the Friends School in Baltimore. Students singing for a stop to war and peace to Ukraine.
We are listening to you in Ukraine. We hear you and we support you, and we want you to know that that our hearts are there, and not just that, but we are willing to put action behind that as well.
And the students say that their activism does not end here. They say they are currently working on their own donation drive, as well as keeping in touch with the local Ukrainian community right here in Baltimore. Live tonight, I'm Amy Lou, WBAL.
okay. So that, they felt really good about that. And I managed to dodge the camera, one of the most important things. That was my former student who's now working at Friends. And these are our little kids. And so people brought out younger students. And like I said, there were about 200 people there at one point. This is our current standings without the slides. The juniors and seniors have had a huge rivalry, and we'll see how that happens. So this is what, when asked for student feedback, if 3 is neutral, how does this compare with our traditional Russian work in terms of how much you like it? You can see that almost nobody liked it less. So that was very high. The student feedback, what aspects, this was extremely rich. And unfortunately, I don't have time to go through this, but if you've noticed, I've highlighted the things that interact with the standards, and people used the words meaningful, important. I feel like I'm interacting with a larger Russian community, hearing what real people think, listening to real interviews, meaningful service, connecting with Ukraine through song. This thing here, I felt like my language skills grew in relation to this topic, but I had to be willing to put in the time to engage with the material. And that's absolutely it. If you see the student feedback, this is a word cloud, and it shows you what they said. I asked them to choose 3 words. They wrote 2 paragraphs of feedback, and I chose them to choose the 3 words that most describe it and hand those in, and I created this. And so that just gives you a sense for what their learning was. Did the unit encourage you to explore the topic or related topics beyond the assigned work for the class? And I assigned a lot of homework, and 83% of them did, which I actually thought was shocking for busy high school students. Many of them said they watched the news, they searched for information, they tried to answer questions they tried to find information. A lot of them watched more of that 1420 YouTube channel or started watching other vloggers speaking about life in Russia. Some said that it made them challenge their own American perspective a little and ask more questions, search for answers. And so on a cognitive level, I think it was amazing. On a linguistic level, this was the result. Definitely more students felt that their language skills did not develop at the same rate as they would with our normal kind of approach and textbook. And so, those are the challenges. Many of the positive conclusions require higher order thinking skills that can't be done in the L2 below intermediate mid. And even then it's a little bit of a challenge. Students can't discuss and negotiate for project-based learning in Russian. It's hard to provide adequate structure and scaffolding if the work's truly supposed to be student-driven. You can make it less student-driven and do that. It's hard, but you can do it. Too much English is spoken, and even students recognize this. And then space practice is really needed for vocabulary and form retention and fluency development at the novice level. So that was the loss, but the positives were amazing. It really did do what, project-based and community-based learning is supposed to do. It developed the 21st century skills to a degree that was important and impactful, critical thinking, cognitively challenging questions. It created cognitive dissonance for them, challenged conventional wisdoms, really made them use higher order thinking skills, analyzing and reflecting. And this, you see this in their choice of, it was meaningful, it was important, it was deep, it was enriching. Their collaboration skills, their leadership and their problem solving skills. It developed really important habits of mind and intercultural competencies, openness to multiple and contradictory cultural perspectives, ability to think of what is appropriate in a given cultural context, and to listen and watch carefully. Like, that's what they learned when they watched those videos. They started to really consider what is said and what's left unsaid, what's being contradicted, what people are, we talked a little bit about the Soviet period too, and satire, and how, you have to read between the lines, and it really developed their empathy. In terms of evidence of commitment beyond scope of project, lifelong learning, it provoked curiosity towards their independent enrichment, and 5 of my juniors are volunteering to tutor Ukrainian refugees in English, because I sent on that announcement that came over the ACTR webpage. So I think it's exactly what we needed to be doing at that time. And I don't think I could always do project-based learning, or my students wouldn't get to intermediate high. It works really well when they're at intermediate mid, intermediate high. But I'm sorry,
Thank you. Yeah.
I didn't have the time. So
But that was amazing. That was actually very amazing, a very important project. And I'm very impressed by your ability to jump on it and like come up with this large, huge project at the last moment and put it so nicely together. And I hope that your students also found it extremely, extremely useful. Unfortunately, we ran out of time for questions. So hopefully, if both Svitlana and Lee will share their slides with our participants, so you'll have a little bit of time between now and next Friday to review the slides and come to the Teachers Lounge, bring your questions, bring your comments, and I think this will be a very, very productive discussion next Friday. And we'll have plenty of time to discuss both presentations and ask questions, more questions and follow-up discussion from this presentation. Thank you, both Svitlana. Thank you, Lee. I will stop the recording at this point.
Hold on, I'm putting